My name is Justina Beinek, and I'm the new Assistant Director of REES, that is, I'm the new Bart. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the series of Brownbag lectures this semester. I've counted 10 of them, and I think all of you have the schedule of those talks. Our inaugural talk is by Professor Vitaly Chernetsky, who probably needs no introduction here. He teaches in the department, Slavic Languages and Literatures, and he's the director of the Center for Russian East European Studies. I know that Professor Chernetsky will talk about the Odessa festival that he frequented last summer.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. And it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to report on what was really a wonderful event, and I was very glad to be a part of that. And while we're doing that, so to prove, here is my official accreditation badge. So yes, I was really there. And I'm going to pass around some propaganda. This is the catalog from this year's festival, the full catalog, and the one from 2 years ago, which I also attended, so you're welcome to have a look. So what I was hoping to do is to use this as an opportunity to give us an insight into the current state of Ukraine's film industry in this state of transformation, and also to share some specifics about the film festival, why it is important and unique, and why its role internationally has only been increasing. There you have it, Isabelle Huppert and Agnieszka Holland. I take my talk as that. They both received major awards, so they're there. The festival was great. But anyway, jokes aside, Ukraine's film industry is historically one of the largest and most important ones within the Soviet and then post-Soviet space. But this is something that people who conventionally study Soviet cinema often do not recognize. And without going too far into the depth of history, the Ukrainian state film company Vuvku, Всеукраїнське кінофотоуправління, the All-Ukrainian cinematic and photo department in the 1920s, was actually the largest film studio, the largest film producer in the Soviet Union. And before the 1930s, all the film industries of individual Soviet Union republics were actually quite independent. So it was only the early 30s that brought about the centralization. So the Ukrainian filmmakers actually had closer ties with within the Soviet Union with Georgia, and outside the Soviet Union with Weimar Germany, than either of them did actually with the film industry in the Russian Federation. But that situation very much changed in the 1930s. Soviet film industry was centralized. Ukraine suffered greatly, as we know, during Nazi occupation. And in fact, a lot of the films that were produced and a lot of the archives of the studios were destroyed during the occupation, sometimes by the Nazis, sometimes by the retreating Soviet troops, because there were a lot of explosions set and fires set, sometimes with distant, remote equipment, and this was a real loss. But sometimes you have these unexpected finds that are happening. A silent Ukrainian film from 1930 has just been found in an archive in Tokyo. The film had been believed lost, so this was all over the news in Ukraine last week, that this film, which is actually a popular science film, so it's like Pudovkin's Early Mechanics of the Brain. It actually deals, with some similar themes.
Man of the High Castle?
I don't know, but they found it in Tokyo, and they're going to restore it and screen it hopefully soon. But fast forwarding to the post-Soviet situation, like other countries in the former Soviet Union, perestroika in the early 90s was a surge of film production numerically, even though the quality was often mixed. And then the economic crisis of the 90s hit the film industry really, really hard. And Ukraine actually took longer, and it was much harder for Ukraine to recover than most of its other peer countries in the post-Soviet space. There was a lot of hope associated with the Orange Revolution, but it only produced a small blip in terms of new film production. And so while in the rest of Ukraine's cultural sphere, the early 2010s, that is the Yanukovych years, were one of the darkest and scariest periods, a very strange thing happened in film industry. And a lot of it is not officially documented, as with often happens in countries of the region. There is the consequences of informal network and patronage systems. But apparently, the younger son of Viktor Yanukovych, Viktor Yanukovych Jr., was a big fan of cinema. So he pleaded with his father so that more funding actually started going into the National Film Agency. Plus, a new and very capable person was hired to oversee it, Katarina Kopylova. So thanks to her leadership in the 2010s, early 2010s, even before Euromaidan, things have started changing in terms of quality, in terms of independence, and in terms of actual films being produced. Because what happened before is that Ukrainian Filmmakers Union was dominated by people who came of age in the 60s or the 70s. Very often these were directors who had a very bright and promising beginning in the 60s and then were completely crushed and their independence crushed with the crackdown of 1972. So with few exceptions, all the films they made after 1972 were quite forgettable. And within the Soviet Union, actually, especially Kyiv's Dovzhenko studio had the reputation as the studio that produced the most boring and ideologically most shackled films of any Soviet film studios in the Brezhnev era, and it continued very much into the 80s. So the remarkable blossoming that we've seen in Ukrainian film industry in the past 7-8 years is indeed a small miracle. And it's a miracle that is worth analyzing. And conveniently enough, the Odessa International Film Festival was also founded in the year 2010. And it took a few years to find its niche, to find its program and bearings. But actually here, this is where the events of Euromaidan really helped. So the Euromaidan, for those who don't know, it's the mass protests of winter 2013-2014 that led to the toppling of the Yanukovych government, Yanukovych fleeing the country, and the revolution bringing in new democratic rule in Ukraine. And unfortunately, though, followed by Russia's annexation of Crimea and a proxy wars started by Russia in the far eastern part of Ukraine and portions of the Donbass region. And not surprisingly, one of the first impulses to both the revolution and later the war events was to document these things. And thus it was documentary cinema that dominated what was happening in Ukraine at those times. And if you look especially at the catalog of the 2015 festival, you will see that it was very much dominated by documentary films about Euromaidan and the war and what had happened. Some of them were by world-famous auteurs like Sergei Loznitsa, aka Sergei Loznitsa. actually a filmmaker with very interesting sort of post-Soviet identity, kind of like Svetlana Alexievich, the recent Nobel Prize winner. He was born in Belarus. He grew up in Ukraine. He received his film education in Moscow. He is now based in Germany. He is his first language is Russian. All his films are co-productions between, like the film that he showed at the Odessa Festival this year, Krotkaya, or A Gentle Creature, is supposedly set in Russia, but it was filmed in Daugavpils in Latvia with an international crew, an English language producer. So while the dialogue in the film is in Russian, the working language of the actual shooting days was English because it was such an international and multilingual crew. So there are a lot of these kind of complicated things happening. In terms of international landmarks of Ukrainian cinema breaking out, a major breakthrough was the film Plemya, The Tribe, by Miroslav Slaboshpitsky. The film garnered more than 30 prizes at international film festivals. And it is, as the director describes it, it is like a Wild West film, but set at a boarding school for the deaf and hard of hearing. So this is a film actually entirely in Ukrainian Sign Language that is not subtitled for the hearing. So the experience is forced for us, the hearing. We have the ambient sounds. We hear footsteps or the rustling of the tree branches or traffic, but there is no music and there is no spoken dialogue. The film, as I said, won over 30 prizes at international festivals and became a huge success. It US distribution was by Draft House Films, so it played at Alamo Draft House in downtown Kansas City, among other places. It was released on DVD and Blu-ray pretty soon afterwards. And it also created a huge controversy because everyone expected that this will be Ukraine's entry into the Oscars, but instead the State Film Agency picked a film that was very patriotic, sort of tugging on the heartstrings film that did well with mass audiences in Ukraine, that was very conventionally made, and of course did not impress the selection jury for foreign language Oscars. This is the film Povadir, The Guide. The film is interesting as a social event, and it has cameos by many prominent people, like the great Crimean Tatar singer Jamala or the writer Serhiy Zhadan. They both have, she has a fairly, she's not a starring role, but a minor role, and Zhadan has a cameo. But the film unfortunately went nowhere, and the scandal around that led to reforms and the creation of an independent Ukrainian Oscar selection committee. There was a lot of debate, and so we see gradually the Ukrainian film industry seriously reviving itself. And both the film nominated last year, which was a very creative documentary by Roman Bondarchuk, Ukrainian sheriffs, about two small-town policemen, and the film that has just been selected as this year's Ukraine's entry, Rivень Chorno, Black Level, which I'll be talking about in a second, which is a very interesting art house film made on a shoestring budget of 20,000 euros, are actually creatively very interesting works. So speaking of very interesting works, let's actually start looking at some of the films. As I said, the 2015 festival was dominated by documentaries. I'm not going to be showing them, but I will just tell you that a lot of them are available online, like Loznitsa's Maidan, or films by many other groups, including the group called Babylon 13, Babylon 13 is a collective of filmmakers who made many short and longer films ranging in length from 20 seconds to 45 minutes about the events first of Euromaidan and then what was happening in Crimea and in Donbass in 2014. And many later prominent filmmakers started as parts of those collective crews. So the 2015 festival, the first one that had a chance for the film production process to go through, had a lot of such events. The 2016 festival, which unfortunately I was not able to attend, gave a very interesting twist in that probably the biggest sensation of that year's festival was a film called My Grandmother Fanny Kaplan. For those who don't know, Fanny Kaplan was the woman who supposedly shot Lenin on August 30th, 1918, and was executed a few days later. Fanny Kaplan was legally blind, so the fact that she was arrested and accused of this is very controversial. To me, add an extra twist, she was the girlfriend of Lenin's younger brother, Dmitry. So there is a lot of strange and murky things around that. And so in reprocessing the legacy of the revolution, it is very interesting that one of Ukraine's biggest cinematic events of last year, of 2016, was this film, My Grandmother Fanny Kaplan, which won the director of the tribe, Miroslav Saboshpitsky, the Best Actor Prize at the the Odessa Film Festival, and that is his first and only acting performance so far. He plays Dmitry Ulyanov, Lenin's younger brother. And it also marked the emergence of a major star of contemporary Ukrainian cinema, Katerina Molchanova, who played the female protagonist. And I'm now going to play the clip. And I am in touch, thanks to Miroslav Saboshpitsky, who introduced me to Katerina Molchanova, who had a pleasure meeting in person in Odessa at the festival this year, of hopefully screening the film next year when the centenary of those events will be upon us. So this is a subtitled clip. Okay, and why is it not? Come on.
Одні змії в воді, і ви намагаєтесь дивитись на дальній і ближчий.
Я впевнений, що це вона. Хто його знає? Що з нею тепер буде? Ти знаєш?
А тепер обережно розплющіть очі.
So as I said, that was the film. Okay, we want to close this. That was the major event at the festival last year and a major discovery. And Katerina Molchanova, as you'll find out, is very prominent in the festival this year. And I will show how that is shortly. So my overall impressions of the festival this year is that there is a turn from the dominance by documentary films towards more Ukrainian feature films, fictional films. In many cases, this is actually former documentary filmmakers who are starting trying themselves in fictional cinematography. There is also, as in 2015, one of the most impressive events I attended is the day-long pitching session when work in progress films are presented by an international panel of film experts, representatives of national film agencies and film festivals from around Europe. The chair of the panel and the moderator is from Germany, and in fact Cottbus in Germany is a place, a festival that gives a lot of grants for East European films under development. So there seems to be the function of Germany as a mediator in this respect. There is also a series of art exhibitions, master classes. Agnieszka Holland did a master class. Sergei Woznitsa did a master class where he actually did a frame-by-frame analysis of his most recent film, Krotkaya, Gentle Creature, which is absolutely stunning. Press conferences, and even concerts, like a concert by this band, Dach Daughters, known as a freak cabaret, they call themselves. They are the younger, unrulier sisters of the famous group Dacha Bracha. In fact, one singer participates in both projects. And they gave a wonderful concert. And one of the women in this band, all of them are theater actors also, will be starring as the female lead on the new film Voroslavgrad, an adaptation of a novel by Serhiy Zhadan, about which hopefully I will have time to say a few words, so I'll pass this around as well. The festival has an international competition and a domestic Ukrainian competition. In the international competition, it's actually interesting to show how much there is sensitivity and being on the pulse of what is happening in global cinema. The Grand Prix went to a very interesting mockumentary called King of the Belgians, which is a joint Belgian, Dutch, Bulgarian co-production. The premise of the film is that the Belgian king is get assigned a British filmmaker who will be a videographer who will produce a film to help improve the Belgian national spirit. They travel to Istanbul to give a gift from Belgium to Turkey. While they're in Istanbul, he gets the news that not Flanders but Wallonia secedes from Belgium. So he needs to travel back, but there is something like the volcano in Iceland, so all the flights are grounded. It is impossible to fly back. They decide to drive back, and they get mired in the Bulgarian countryside, and a lot of things happen. The film actually is very well produced and quite interesting, and a very deserving winner. And then the first prize went to a Catalan film, which some people say will likely be Spain's entry in this year's Oscars, Summer 1993, which is a debut film by woman director Carla Simon. There is also a series of films by members of the international jury, one of whom happened to be Zaza Urushadze. That's one of the films that was screened was the Estonian-Georgian co-production Tangerines, which we'll be showing next week and which Professor Scott here will be introducing. There has also a series of retrospectives. There was a retrospective organized by the Dovzhenko Center, Ukraine's Film Archive, and this year's theme was called The Tender Age, the films about teenagers from the Thaw era through Perestroika. So they included such famous films as Marlene Khutseyev's Two Fyodors and Kira Muratova's A Long Farewell, which some people might not associate with Ukraine because the films are made in Russian, but they actually were made in Ukraine and with Ukrainian talent. There also was, the Dovzhenko Center continues its project of retrospective of silent films that they restore with new soundtracks. And we have a major discovery that the last independent pre-censorship film by Dziga Vertov's younger brother, Mikhail Kaufman, Nebuvali Pahid, or in Russian, Nebuvali Pahod, The Unprecedented Journey, a silent film from 1931, so the very tail end of silent cinema, was found in the archives. It was simply mislabeled, so it was sitting there all along. And I'm going to show now a teaser for that, if technology cooperates with me. There it is. Control. So, control. So this is the composer Anton Baybakov, who became one of the leading contemporary Ukrainian composers. And so it's a score of contemporary music. The film, like Dovzhenko's Earth, is about collectivization. It's the so-called 20-тысячники, the army, the urban conscious workers who are sent to the countryside to help with collectivization. But just as in Dovzhenko's film, you can argue that what Kaufman does is very much a subversion of the surface message. So the film can be read against the grain, and listening it with the kind of melancholic music that Baybakov composed for it really emphasizes those internal contradictions. So this sort of follows kind of Eisensteinian's idea of contrapuntal montage, where music and the visuals can go against the grain of each other. So this was one of the major events. This is a rather long clip, so in the interest of time, I'm going to cut it short, but I assure you it's very, very interesting. I have a good working relationship with the Dovzhenko Center, so most of the films they've released on DVDs, including The Silence, we already have it EGARC in our collection, and I'm making sure we get others. Although there is a problem in that, okay, I'm gonna put, in that these days actually pressing DVDs becomes less of a viable situation, so very often it's just a digital release, but the question is then how to transfer files and enter them in catalog. For instance, I got thanks to what happened to contacts and Sloboshpetsky's help, we'll be showing, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, doing a US premiere of Kira Muratova's 2009 film Melody for a Street Organ, Melodia для Шарманки, but they send the files. EGARC burned the DVD for us, and then we cannot legally enter it into a catalog as something that is available at the university for people to check out, because it's not a DVD that was officially industrially produced. Sort of a burning a single DVD like this creates a legal problem. So I would like to say that documentaries are still very much prominent there, and some of it is actually a combination of product of documentary theater with documentary cinema. One of the remarkable events is the win of the Grand Prix in the Generation 14 Plus at this year's Berlinale. The film School Number 3, which is set in a small town of Mykolaiivka near Slovyansk in the Donbas region, the part of it that is now liberated and under control of Ukrainian government. And it started as a documentary theater play and monologues by high school children. And then it was developed into a film that I would say is really remarkable. So the Ukrainian premiere of it, come on, happened at the Odessa Festival.
Красная зона. Купание запрещено.
Но мы сейчас, кроме Николаевки, ничего и не видели. Что мы сейчас живем такое чувство на том же Марсе, потому что мы и так ничего и не знаем, считай, про этот мир.
So with the monologues, each person holds an important thing, like a curtain or a bicycle helmet or a toy or something like that. So it's one of those documentary theater monologues devices.
На винограде я увидел жука, при том, что у меня жутко болели ноги, и я просто мог его вот так раздавить и все. Я вот так его взял, отнес на балкон и выпустил с балкона, и он улетел. Мне не хотелось его убивать, я не знаю, не хотелось. И поэтому ставить вопрос, убью ли я человека, если я не могу убить жука, как-то не ставлю себе больше такие вопросы.
And there are also different spaces in school and around the school, but the interviews take place.
Опять с ним, мне так сразу противно становится, такой жар по лицу, по всему телу, и я хочу уже идти крошить и убивать. Но мне нужно идти на вальс. Да, я иду на вальс, весь вечер наблюдаю за одноклассниками, как они тренируются. На половине занятий выхожу домой, покупаю в ВТБ зажигалку, о которой потом рассказываю. И весь вечер провожу за тем, что слушаю песни Radiohead. Как обычно, в принципе.
Okay, so again, in the interest of time, I'm going to cut it short, but a really remarkable film, and I very much hope that it will become available in this country. Another film that I'd like to draw everyone's attention is Рівень Чорного by Vasinovich, which has just been selected as Ukraine's entry for the Oscars. Katerina Molchanova, who you just saw as Fanny Kaplan, is the female lead. And Vasinovich is a director in his own right, but he also was the producer of Sloboshvitsky's The Tribe, the film about the deaf-mute boarding school. This film, interestingly, also has no dialogue. So this is something about Ukrainian experimental in cinema that is trying to do films with no dialogue whatsoever, and this is one of those. Again.
How many sides does a pentagon have?
5.
What causes disease?
Bacteria.
Come.
So the main character is a art photographer about 50 years old going through midlife crisis and trying to figure out what to do with his life. Okay, cancel. Why does it have autoplay? We don't want autoplay. Okay. So another film that I'd like to draw everyone's attention is a wonderful film where based on a play by actually somebody who happens to be a friend of mine, Roman Horbek, a very talented young man who is also a media studies scholar, just got his Ph.D. from Södertörn University in Sweden. This film is great in that it utilizes a lot of tropes of international cinema, but it's a road film It's, if you wish, a horror film about going to the countryside. And it is filmed entirely in Surzhyk. And Surzhyk is a patois that mixes elements of Ukrainian and Russian grammar, vocabulary, and so on and so forth. It's called Priputny, which is a real name of a village in the Chernihiv region. And Roman happens to be from that area, not from that village, but from another village nearby. This village just has a very in Ukrainian, onomatopoeically, the name sounds very well. The problem is, of course, is how do you do English subtitles for something that is in Surzhyk? It's impossible to render. So they tried to do something that is more slangy or conversational, which is not always necessarily works, but you still get the visuals. It's more of a dark comedy rather than a horror film, so I should probably blew it a little bit by saying that there are elements of horror, but there are some elements of that. And the acting jobs of everyone in the film are absolutely stunning. So I very much hope that this film gets to this country as well.
Мужчина, нам нужно попрыгать, точно. Что тебе лучше буде, коли я вибрав салон?
Тебе блювану. Я тебе щас блювану. Тільки сидіння почеться. Треба його срочно відправити в лікарню Ніжина. Ні, краще до Чернігова. З Ніжина не всі повертаються живі.
Я тут теж думаю. 20 гривень.
20 гривень is less than $1. Sorry. Okay, but even though that film, to me, was probably the most interesting discovery, the Grand Prix of the national competition actually went to another documentary. So the dominance of documentaries remains. So Roman Bondarchuk, whose film Ukrainian Sheriffs was Ukrainian entry into the Oscars, made a very touching, moving documentary film about a high school jazz band from Kherson. It's warm, it's tugging at your heartstrings. To me, it's just too safe of a choice. I mean, the kids are sweet and adorable. And yes, coming of age is a universal experience. But it felt to me like a very safe decision of a jury as a compromise. Still, here is a little taste of that film for you. Of course, with the name Dixieland, unfortunately, YouTube suggests things with Confederate flags and things like that, which was rather uncomfortable to see that bad, on the right when I was preparing this. One of the things that I really liked seeing is that some results of the pitching competition from 2015 were shown there, like the film Frost by Šarūnas Bartas, a Lithuanian director. It's a French, Polish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian co-production with Vanessa Paradis in a cameo role and Andrzej Hira, a fairly prominent Polish actor, in another prominent role. It's about two Lithuanian volunteers who go to deliver basically a truckload of supplies to the Ukrainian soldiers as humanitarian aid, but traveling through Ukraine and trying to figure out why are they interested in being there, what happens, why is this war going on, how do we process those things. That the film premiered at Cannes at Un Certain Regard. Fortunately, didn't get any prizes. And the director felt that the film still needed more work, so the version shown in Odessa actually was quite different from the one shown at Cannes in May, and apparently tinkering continues. So we'll see what happens going forward. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip that, but what I'm going to show is the trailer for the wonderful winner of the short competition by Katarina Hornostai, who started out as a documentary filmmaker. She's a student of Marina Razbeshkina. The film is called Lilac, or Buzok in Ukrainian, and I call it a gynocentric film in that it's a film by women about women. There was one man, I think, in the film crew who was the camera person, paradoxically, so you could do, if you wish, some psychoanalytically influenced film theory analysis, what did that do? Since the camera gaze was with a male camera operator. But it was a really interesting experience. It was a semi-improvisational film, so yes, again, it's the post-essay film, post-Cassavetes and those kind of things. A group of 5 women, 20-somethings, chatting with each other. What also, to me, is interesting, it's an example of Ukraine's non-accommodating bilingualism. Of the 5 characters, 2 speak Ukrainian all the time, 3 speak Russian all the time. And that's how the dialogue the conversations go in. And this is one of the realities of how the language practices happen very much in contemporary Ukraine. So here is a trailer, and this one is on Vimeo. Hopefully it works. There's Molchanova again. She's probably going to be everywhere in contemporary Ukrainian cinema because she brings luck to filmmakers. If she's in the movie does well. It's a 25-minute long short, so longish short. In general, the shorts program was really remarkable, and this continues to be one of the great strengths of Ukrainian cinema. Ukraine has received won the Cannes Festival in the short film competition now several times. So, no, we do not want Zizio. So that has been one of the traditional strengths of Ukrainian cinema. The problem is often how to get from the shorts to the full-length features, but right now we have a wave of a lot of shorts filmmakers who are getting funding, and this is one of those things. Ukraine has been able to completely divorce itself from Russian funding. There is still some participation from Russia in terms of occasional actors, very often oppositional actors like Lia Hidjakova, who was a guest of honor at the festival, and of course there was a standing ovation because she's a vocal opponent of Putin's regime and its policies. And but the funding is now domestic funding increased, and very active collaboration with international film industries. One of the films presented at the pitching session, actually just for promotional reasons because the film was completed, is the first ever Ukrainian-Icelandic co-production. So Iceland funded it. The film actually is quite interesting in its own right. Since we're almost out of time, and I have to teach a class at 1, and I actually have some of the students in the class here, what I'm going to close is just to show two things. One from the press conference about the launch of the film Voroshilovgrad, adaptation of Serhiy Zhadan's award-winning novel. The production actually just began right after, and they had to reconstruct the gas station where all the action in the novel happens because it was destroyed. It was based on a real gas station, so which they rebuilt for the film, and the shooting began in August. And I very much look forward to it. And I have good news in that Serhiy Zhadan will be coming to the US in April, and most likely he will be part of our Ukrainian writer guest series here. He is an award-winning writer who of both poetry and prose, and a basically remarkable figure, sort of a rock star of contemporary Ukrainian literature, so you would not want to miss his visit. And the director of the film is Yaroslav Ladygin, who previously made several very successful shorts, but it's his first full-length feature. And one other lovely thing is a digital animated feature, which is in production. It's scheduled now, planned to release for early 2019, called Mavka, which is based on Lesya Ukrainka's symbolist early 20th century play Forest Song, sort of modernist adaptation of folklore motifs, but also with a lot more folklore. So it's not a straightforward adaptation of Lesya Ukrainka's play, but something that is inspired by it, and which we're going to have the soundtrack by Daha Bracha. So this is a little promotional teaser with which I'll wrap up, and we'll have like 3 minutes for 1 or 2 questions. Thank you for your patience. Okay, come on, work with me. Of course. Why did it stop? So Mavka is a forest nymph of the month of May. So this is May, and she hibernated in the winter, and she's waking up next to a willow tree who protected her over the winter. So of course it's a human boy playing the flute, and the story is their interaction, their life. So thank you so much, and I'm going to cancel this one, and I am glad that you were able to come here, and I have time for maybe one or two questions before, with the students, I run off and deal with a totally different topic, the poetry of Alexander Blok. But so, questions, anyone?
I just ask one question. I'm sorry if you already said this earlier, but could you just tell us a tiny bit about the Odessa Festival in terms of funding?
The funding is an entirely independent thing. I actually did not talk about it. There is a slightly controversial aspect, is that the festival's president is a wife of a Ukrainian politician and oligarch, Serhiy Tihipko, Victoria. But Tihipko, who was a member of the Party of Regents, has basically more or less left politics and went completely into business. And Victoria Tihipko is herself this is not his first wife. This is his second wife, who was a very successful independent business person already before the marriage. And she took the role of helping Ukrainian film industry very, very seriously. And she gave at the professional session a keynote address about professional technical changes in global film industry. And I was really impressed by the chops of her as an industry professional. So the festival does receive some support from the State Film Agency, but and from the city. It's a public-private partnership, and it is the leading film festival in Ukraine. There is also the festival Molodist in Kyiv, which is a festival especially dedicated to first full-length features by international filmmakers. And that festival has been running since Soviet days and continues, but it's a bit of a niche festival as opposed to the Odessa Film Festival, which has now met for 8 times, and next year will be the 9th, and really found its voice and its identity and is doing very well.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much, everyone.